Welcome to part 2 of the Firefighter Challenge here on R.I.T Team Radio, where I'm again joined by Trevor Fera, as well as Ryan Provencher, where we're going to be talking about a little bit more of Trevor's experiences within the course, but then being able to segment out what it really means to go through the course, the toll it takes on the body, more of the sciencey side. What does bioenergetics say? What different energy systems are we utilizing within this course? And then being able to pick apart what are different movement patterns, what's the biomechanics side, what are different assessments we can do to evaluate these different attributes, these different components. So with all of that being said, I'm going to kind of shift it over to Trevor. And Trevor, just give us a brief rundown, because the previous episode, the first episode, we talked about the course. Right, we kind of introduced what the challenge is, the Firefighter Challenge. So just a brief overview. What is the challenge, and just what are the tasks?
What's up, guys? Good to be back. So the Firefighter Combat Challenge, the toughest 2 minutes in sports. It's an all-out firefighting task race. It started out as a fitness test, and now it's become our Olympics. It's pretty competitive. So the tasks are stairs. You go up and down. When you get to the top, you hoist a hose that mimics hoisting equipment. Come back down. You hit a force machine with a mallet, mimics using an axe. Then you run through fire hydrants. You drag a hose. You're dragging a hose like you would in a fire, and then you pick up Rescue Randy and you drag him backwards.
I like how you mentioned, well, you're dragging hose just like you would. I think that's last time you described. I think that's exactly what you said too. I mean, it's when we talk job simulation, right? That's exactly what you're doing.
Make firefighters just simple.
Do what?
Keep it simple for firefighters.
Keep it simple. Keep it simple. And I mentioned different components of this that we would kind of pick it apart. And Ryan, on your side, when you first look at the challenge as a coach, as a trainer, what is it? Where do your eyeballs go? Like, what does that mean to kind of evaluate? And we'll hone in on each one of these, but just overview. What are you looking for from a performance perspective? If you're going to coach individuals, and then we'll transition to Trevor here in a second. But when you're looking, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so when you take a step back and you look at the course in totality and you consider the performance aspect of it in a competitive environment, as Trevor just described, first thing that comes to mind for me is just really analyzing the movement patterns involved all the way through the course. Like, going up the stairs to me very closely mimics a lunge pattern, just as an example. The next piece of that is going to be energy systems. And I know you're going to go into a much deeper dive on energy systems, but it really makes sense to optimize the athlete in a specific energy system that relates to the competition that he or she will be participating in. And then the other really important piece to all of this that may be underutilized for some is the whole recovery aspect. So, when we'll talk all about physical attributes, and we'll kind of get into what are those physical attributes that best support performance for the athlete, and then how, as coaches, do we build a comprehensive program that supports them long-term in terms of their performance.
So that's, an evaluation as a coach is to understand these different components, these different segments, if you will, from an observation, a measurement, and then from a prescriptive manner. In order to do that, though, and also from, let's say, Trevor's personal experience, what does it mean to go through the course? Like when you're going through, Trevor, on your side, when you're going through, and you could be as descriptive as you want, right? But as you're going through, what does it mean to go through each task? How does your body feel? And this is unique to you, right? Depending on the individual, depending on where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, not from the aspect of strength as an attribute, but just where they're relatively have high performance in, and where they're weak at. They might have a different feeling, but kind of an overview as you're going through, kind of run through each of the tasks and then your own personal experiences through that.
Yeah. So first things first is trying to keep your nerves down, and then when it's ready to go, it's go time, right? So yeah. So when you're first picking up the pack and you're going up the stairs, it's a all out sprint. So when you get to the top of the stairs, usually the lactic acid is starting to build up. You're already tired. You're only 15 seconds in. So the rope pull is just all out, go as hard as you can, as fast as you can, and you can almost kind of get a little bit of recovery there. And then coming down, it's coming down is kind of an art. You want to come down fast, but at the same time, slow your breathing down, get some oxygen going, and just don't think about how hard the rest of the course is.
Yeah.
So the force machine, it's a good combination between how fast you can hit it and how hard you can hit it. You can hit it really hard, but really slow, and you're gonna come off it really slow. So you got to kind of find that fine balance. And then when you're going through the hydrants, it's a sprint. You're tired, and now you got all your equipment on, you got your bottle on, and you got to find some energy to sprint it through the hydrants. And then for me personally, dragging the hose is one of the hardest parts. It's heavy, and it just kicks the shit out of you, slows you right down. Mentally, you're exhausted, your legs are finished. You can't even get enough oxygen in you anymore. And then when you get to the rescue Randy, you have to like
you get to the final task, which is, and I don't know if it's the most difficult, and what's interesting enough, and we'll talk about this later on competitive versus non-competitive, is everyone always says from a non-competitive side, if we could just put the victim rescue at the beginning, I'd be okay. There's a reason they put it toward the end, right? So what, other than being gassed and just being, just trying to catch your breath with which physiologically, like you really can't, like when you're lifting rescue Randy, when you're going through that process, like where do you feel on your body, what's taking the most demands or taking the most toll on you?
Yeah, so when you get to them, your body is just saying stop. It doesn't want to go anymore. But now you have to deadlift this thing, and you got to hold it. And it's heavy. It's 175 pounds, and all the weight is sitting on your quads. Your quads are already screaming. So now you're starting to move backwards, and the lactic acid is not letting your legs move. Like you're just feels like you're stuck. But then you have to break that mental barrier, and you just go. You just figure it out, dig deep.
You're like, your legs just don't want to move, but guess
they
what?
Don't want to move.
To complete the course, like you have to move, right?
For me personally, I'll get halfway through the dummy drag, and my vision is getting really small. I know that you're teetering on the edge of passing out. I've actually have passed out before, but it's just mind over matter when it gets to that point. I think that's the hardest part for most people.
You're gonna have to share that story with us another time. That's for sure.
I'll show you a video.
But yeah, I mean, everything you mapped out from personal experience makes sense when we start talking about the science of why, right? And we talked about lactate and lactic acid and just the accumulation of lactate and how you felt that sensation in your legs where you just couldn't move any further. You weren't able to replenish your systems and to eliminate the lactate out of your system and to be able to keep going. And so that's where here we'll talk about kind of the sciencey of why, right? And we'll talk about energy systems as a whole. So I like to try and keep it as simple as possible. Think of energy systems as different fuel sources or energy sources where we can perform from, something that's supplying us with the energy that we need. Now, through these multiple energy systems or supply of energy, we are always, in some form or fashion, they're all active in nature, but the priority or the percentage that we're utilizing for a specific task for a specific duration is going to kind of differ as they deplete, as the duration goes up and the intensity goes down. And energy systems are a large reason of why intensity goes down and duration goes up. You can't maintain, and right? You might be, all or nothing, maximal effort that first sprint. And even though you powered through those tasks, you had to slow down to at least a small percentage every single couple of seconds because that intensity you did in that sprint, you couldn't just maintain it, especially you got to more of the drags and more toward the end. You know, if you could maintain intensity, you just pick up the equipment and you just haul it off as fast as possible. But you were depleting those initial energy sources. So that's how I like to explain it, right? So we have our anaerobic alactate, which is our ATP phosphocreatine. This is usually where we associate creatine with. And we think from and creatine has so many different benefits. I can't, preach highly enough about it, but that's where one of the mentalities with creatine is, if I can supplement enough, then maybe I can assist this energy system. But the anaerobic alactic, or the ATP phosphocreatine, is our initial burst, all or nothing. Think the first 6 seconds, right? That first sprint, utilize our ATP phosphocreatine system, right? We used all or nothing. After that 6 seconds, after that first initial maximal effort, we start shifting gears and we start going into the glycolysis energy system, which can be looked at as our anaerobic lactic glycolytic system. It can be looked at as glycolysis, but it's divided into two. So we go from phosphocreatine drifting into glycolysis, or our anaerobic glycolytic system, and we're now utilizing sugar. We're now utilizing glucose. This can be from our muscle. This can be from our bloodstream or our liver. There's various sources in which we acquire this, but we're now using sugar. We're still not using oxygen per se to supply the energy, so we're still at a higher intensity, but it's lower than what the first initial system was. And for still kind of that, say after 6 seconds up until probably 30 seconds to about a minute. So we're drifting into a little bit longer duration. We're now using sugars, and then we start shifting. After about that 2 minute, 3 minute mark, we now start supplying the system by oxygen, and it all depends on the accumulation of lactate. About midway through, if we can backtrack a little bit, about midway through, our system decides whether we can utilize oxygen or not. And so if we can't, that's where we have to stop. If we cannot maintain that intensity, and we have to lower the intensity and have to utilize oxygen, if we're asking it to go at a higher intensity, the body literally cannot. It's not clearing enough lactate out of the system, and we can't supply enough energy. That's where when you say you hit the wall and your legs just can't go, in that context, you're very close to there is a literal wall where we cannot surpass it. There's a literal physiological wall where if we're not clearing our system in enough time, and we're just accumulating this, you literally hit the wall and can't keep going. And that's where your body shifts gears to the oxidative or more of the aerobic side. So you literally had to decrease your intensity, and now we're going aerobic, and now we're going to oxygen contact. So you're shifting all through this throughout the entirety of your race. You're going from the ATP phosphocreatine, then after the first 10 seconds, now you're shifting into glycolysis, which first is anaerobic, then you shift to aerobic, and then you get into the oxidative. Now you're not in the oxidative as long, because hopefully the race isn't longer than 5 minutes, but you're shifting to that energy system. You're slowly getting to that source. But that means your intensity had to go down for you to be able to go even farther. So what does this mean from an assessment standpoint? Like, what are we kind of looking for? What are the markers that shows your fitness level? And so I'll drift this question over to you, Ryan, is what does it mean to be able to measure this? How can we look at energy systems from a measurement standpoint?
Well, first, I think it's important to note that Trevor never uses his aerobic system because he never goes past the 2 minutes.
There you go.
Important to note that for Trevor in particular. But yeah, I think this is where we get to kind of talk about how do we measure lactate threshold? How do we measure aerobic capacity? And then coming into other physical attributes, because it does matter. How do we measure muscular strength, power, and endurance? How do we measure mobility? All of these things we can measure in our exercise physiology lab, or if we've got programs in our fire departments, we could do that as part of our annual fitness assessment, for example, and get these numbers as a baseline. And then once we start getting out onto the course, maybe doing, and we'll talk even how we might use this as a job simulation, we can start to correlate the baseline numbers for each of these assessments in our fitness assessment to the actual performance on the course.
Well, I like how you said, right, and Trevor, not going past that, not even getting close to that 5 minute marks. You're not even in the oxidative or the aerobic side of things. But that's a good thing to note too, because like you said, being labeled as the toughest 2 minutes, right, is then why would, from a mentality and programming standpoint, this is just kind of a side topic, is why would someone even go through and only train cardio per se if they're trying to get better at this, if you're not even really emphasizing that energy system? Just as an open question or observation to you guys.
Well, and I think Trevor mentioned it just when we were chatting earlier today. It's really important to have a foundation for all of these physical attributes. So again, aerobic capacity, muscular strength, endurance, power, all of that baseline. And then, and we can measure all of that. And then Trevor, do you just want to share in your experience, and even as a coach, how do you see having this baseline information or having metrics associated to someone's baseline fitness level to their performance on the course?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see because lots of people don't train properly. They will train the cardio, go for a run, which is really not benefiting us at all. But it's neat to see where like the lactic acid builds up, how to kind of push through that, how to train to get to that point. It's really, really hard to do. So one thing that we'll kind of do, we call them back halves of the course, where you do the second half of the course, you do it at 100%, but then you would do it again at 100% and train your body to be tired and the lactic acid's built up to do it again and kind of keep pushing that way until you can do both rounds almost 100%.
Yeah. So pushing the body's ability, the body's capacity to be able to do more at a higher intensity for a longer duration, right? And so from a lab or clinical setting, to be able to look at lactic threshold, you literally have someone on a treadmill per se, and there's similar to VO2 max treadmill test, something you can do, but it actually involves getting a blood sample. So you'll prick their finger and you'll test it, you'll look at it, and what you're looking for is the concentration of lactate in their blood. And I believe the threshold is 4 millimoles per deciliter for lactic threshold. And what that means is, as you are going through physical exertion, your body is producing lactate, and at the same token, you want to be able to clear it from your system at the same or faster rate. So that's not accumulating. Once you exert to the high enough intensity for a high enough duration, it accumulates faster than you're clearing it. So once you get to, and it's labeled at that 4 millimoles is kind of what is labeled as your threshold. So anything past that, it just constantly accumulates. You're not recovering from it. You're not clearing it at all. So the goal is, if you can go harder at your threshold versus someone who can't go at the same pace at their threshold, then you're more fit and you can finish the course faster. So from a lactate threshold, from a measurement standpoint, now VO2 is similar in nature. The difference is with VO2, there's plenty of sub-max VO2s you can do. Some sub-max VO2s might be better than others. Make sure you do your research on which ones you're choosing and do they really have a good validation and correlation over to a true VO2. But if you have access to an exercise physiology lab and they can hook you up to a med cart, they can hook you up to something to be able to establish that, then VO2, I mean, is another metric to look at. But then again, in your context, lactate threshold is going to be key, and being able to maintain a higher intensity for a longer period of time. So let's look at next attribute, right? What are some of the other, when you're picking apart, and question for you, Ryan, is when you're picking apart the tasks, what is another component you look at? And then maybe how can we look at measuring that?
Yeah, right. So, Trevor walked us through the course. And so if we're looking at movement patterns and just quickly brushing through this. So the lunge going up the stairs, horizontal pull in your hose hoist. Forcible entry is primarily a hinge, but there's a pulling element as you're bringing the sledge down and into the prop. Hose advance is forward locomotion, but there's also a kind of a vertical press through the shoulders. And then last is the victim rescue, where you've got kind of that deadlift and then reverse locomotion. So you're looking at all the movement patterns, and obviously based on everything we've talked about, you can train your energy systems in the ways that we've talked about to optimize that in providing energy to support you in completing the course. But you also need the muscular strength and the power to lift and to move and to generate force at each of these phases of the event. And so that becomes a very important piece of your programming in your periodized training. Obviously the conditioning side of it, but also the strength side of it.
All right. So multiple attributes. You have to be able to maintain that intensity, but then also be powerful enough, be strong enough, have the endurance depending on the task. So depending on the task, there's an attribute associated with it on top of, hey, guess what? Intensity still got to be high. So Trevor, on your side, what are some, maybe a couple of the tasks that you specifically train for? And then in addition to that, maybe some areas you've seen other participants you've coached and observed, maybe areas they fall short, or some advice you give them on things to train to prep for those courses?
So something I do all the time, and I always get everybody else to train, is do an 8-minute treadmill run. Starts from a walk to a jog to a run to a sprint. By the time you get to the sprint, it's all out for 2 minutes, hard as you can, and see how far you make it. So that's kind of what I use to measure. But as far as other exercises, lots of Olympic lifting. It's full body over your head, clean and jerk snatches, kettlebell snatches. Then we go into sled pushes and pulls. What else? There's some good ones. Med ball slams to mimic the chopping. Yeah, those are a few of my staples. That's for sure.
Yeah,
I try to pass those ones on.
Well, and even just off of that, right? There's parts of those, and you mentioned Olympic lifting and picking apart the components, right? Being powerful, being able to do Olympic lifts, doing snatches. You mentioned choosing med ball slams and different tasks that associate the movement patterns, right? So choosing your tasks, choosing your exercises based on the tasks you're doing in the challenge. It's not just like, oh, I feel like I should improve chest. I'm gonna go in and improve chest. Or, hey, this might incorporate some sort of bicep. Let me just go do biceps, right? You're kind of picking apart what the attributes are, what the movements are, and then how do you choose exercises off of that? What are some lessons learned, or even some advice you give some of the participants that you coach or observe, or maybe areas they fall short where they're training a certain way, and then you're like, hey, if you're really trying to prep for this, might shift gears in some manner?
A big one for me is I see a lot of people training really, really heavy and really slow. And this course is still about speed. You still got to get through it as fast as you can. So I always tell everybody, as soon as you start slowing down, you're done. Drop the weight, do it again. So that's a big thing. And I think you're just training your body to move slow. So when you're tired in the course, it's exactly what you're going to do. So let's train our bodies to move fast to get through it. That's probably the biggest one. I see a lot of people training slow and heavy and like long, we'll say dummy drags. They'll do long dummy drags for a minute. Well, your dummy drag is only 15 seconds. So let's learn how to do this fast as we can for 15 seconds. That's a big one.
Ryan, on your side, from a observation and measurement standpoint, are there any kind of strength tests or endurance tests or power tests or any kind of a measurement components or tests that you feel like individuals could implement to be able to observe of what their current status is or what their current level is at?
I think there's different ways you can approach it. I think the most basic way is to really embrace, the IFF, IAFC have kind of updated their fitness assessment for firefighters. It does include aerobic capacity. It does include power, muscular strength, and endurance. And it's very simple to facilitate that in a fire station, for example. So I think that may be something that's the most accessible for the most people. And then you could get into other assessments like Trevor referred to, that his treadmill test, as he called it, it's a baseline. Like, how far into that final 2 minutes can the athlete get before they start?
Yeah, that's a good one, though.
And you get to record that. And then as they improve, that number gets better and better and better. And then hopefully, and I'm sure Trevor has seen that, it translates onto the course. And then the other thing I want to kind of talk about, certainly from an assessment standpoint, but also from a training standpoint, is we can really use this course certainly in a competitive environment, but also in a non-competitive environment. So we could use the course itself as a measurement, as a baseline fitness assessment for speed. We could also really slow things down. How many times can you go through the course on one bottle before your bell rings? So and that's an objective measurement that kind of captures all of this into one evolution. So I know in the part 3, we're going to collaborate and provide some different workouts for folks to really give them something intentional that they can dig into. But when we're talking about just that assessment piece, we really have a lot of options from something very simple and very basic to something more complex that may even utilize in your lab, for example.
Right. And as you were explaining, there's various, I like how you said there's various ways, right? There's no one set way to measure an attribute to acquire a very specific metric. It depends is like the snazziest and most common phrase you're going to hear in the fitness. And I know it's like we're in academics and all those great things. It's give me a clear-cut scientific answer, and it depends probably pops up 99% of the time. But it depends on what you're looking for and how you're measuring, and then what you're doing with it, right? In many instances, yes, it can be great to use validated and very common tests that are out there, but even creating your own. I mean, Trevor, I like your test. There's as long as you do the same protocol every single time, then you get a baseline and you see how they improve. It's hitting on those energy systems that you're using. Now, like, how far can you get in the 2 minutes? And it's looking at the energy system itself. It's not the actual task. So the specificity is not as high, literally replicating the task, but from an energy system component, that's what you're looking at. And there's various ways to do that. Same thing with power. There's certain tasks you do within the challenge where it's very power driven. Doesn't mean every power test is right for you, but choose a power test that's looking at that movement pattern and in the capacity of power. And there you go. You have a baseline. You have something measurable, because if you can measure it, you can manage it. You can prescribe off of that. And you have the ability to get the results, to get the adaptations that you need. Yes, it requires finding the test to measure that, but then getting the coaching, the advice, the prescription, and developing that plan to be able to move forward. Before I wrap the episode up as far as summary and so forth, do you two have any other words of wisdom, extra 2 cents, anything to add for those that are listening on the just the analysis of the course itself?
Well,
Let
Hussien,
you know that, Ryan.
I think we can tie this into Hussien. A lot of what we talk about, we talk about being intentional in your training. We talk about, for firefighters, we can still have the structure of periodization and still bring in the flexibility that supports the stress of firefighting and shift work. And when we look at this event, either as a competitive event or even as a non-competitive event, we can structure an entire periodized physical training program around this event that includes strength training twice a week, that includes metabolic conditioning once a week or twice a week, that includes focused recovery and regeneration in between your work sessions, so that when you are training, to Trevor's point, you have access to that speed and you can reach the intensity that you want to reach without overtraining. You're actually recovering and preparing and progressing in the program to optimize your performance.
Fantastic. And then Trevor, on your side, those that are looking to train for this challenge, I mean, words of wisdom or lessons learned, maybe things you did and you're like, man, that didn't work out well for me, whatever it might be. What's kind of a tidbit of wisdom for the audience here?
Smooth is fast. Learn to be smooth, and you'll get fast. And then that comes with strength, comes with speed as well. But smooth is fast. That's my infinite wisdom right there.
There you go.
Muscle memory.
And then also try and lessen the nerves before you start, and then something about not trying to pass out. All those great things. Well, awesome, gentlemen. We talked about anything from just an overview of energy systems, making sure if you're prepping for this, you're training in the right energy systems. You're looking at the course and what the task consists of from an attribute. Is it strength? Is it power? Is it agility? Is it endurance, right? What are the attributes of the tasks? And then looking at movement patterns and looking at from a non-competitiveness or from the challenge itself as a competition. So giving a very a breakdown of the course itself, and then drifting into the next episode, we're going to give you very prescriptive, very actionable things to do based on what we know about the course. Here are things we can do. Here are things, takeaways that you can incorporate into your regimen. And then moving forward, you'll be able to implement these plans into your training prescription.